This morning you spent about 2 minutes scrubbing your teeth with a plastic stick and a tube of paste made from fluoride, detergent, and mint. You have probably had a cavity, maybe a filling, maybe a root canal, maybe braces. And here is the part that should bother you. A hunter-gatherer who lived 40,000 years ago, who never saw a toothbrush and had no idea what a dentist was, had fewer cavities than you. Less gum disease, a straighter bite. Their teeth were ground down and they still got abscesses, so this is not a story about a lost paradise. But the specific rot that fills your dentist's schedule was rare. And it was rare without toothpaste, without floss, and without a dentist. Once you understand why, you will realize that brushing your teeth is not some ancient skill we finally perfected. It is damage control for a problem we created ourselves. Cleaning your teeth is older than our species. Toothpick grooves show up on fossil teeth going back almost 2 million years. Tiny channels worn into enamel by something thin and firm, pushed between the teeth over and over. But the clearest case sits in a rock shelter called Krapina, in what is now Croatia. 4 Neanderthal teeth, 130,000 years old. 2 of them shoved out of position by an impacted molar. Around them, 6 toothpick grooves, scratches gouged into the dentin, chips broken off the enamel. This was not grooming. It was not habit. Someone was in pain and was digging at the tooth that hurt, with a bone splinter or a stiff stem of grass, hard enough to break enamel. The anthropologist who examined those teeth, David Freyer, reads it as self-treatment. A Neanderthal doing dentistry on itself, 130,000 years before anyone invented the wheel. So our closest relatives were working on their teeth before our species existed. And hunter-gatherers, who owned nothing you would recognize as a dental product, kept the cavities away anyway. Which leaves one question. Why are your teeth worse than theirs? Not because they knew a secret we lost, because they were not eating what you eat. The thing that broke the human mouth was not a lack of brushing, it was farming. And later, sugar. Consider what a hunter-gatherer actually ate: raw roots, fibrous plants, sinewy meat, nuts and seeds. Chewing that was work, and all that grinding dragged abrasive fiber across the teeth with every bite, scouring off plaque before it could settle. It is also why their teeth were worn flat by middle age. And there was almost no sugar. The bacteria that cause decay feed on sugar and refined carbohydrate. Give them very little of either, and they cannot do much damage. Their mouths were not clean, because anyone cleaned them. They were clean because there was nothing in there worth rotting. That does not mean nothing ever went wrong, and we know because teeth keep records. Plaque hardens into a mineral crust called calculus, and that crust traps whatever passed through the mouth, then holds it for 50,000 years. At a cave called El Sidron in northern Spain, a team led by Laura Weyrich pulled DNA out of that crust from Neanderthals who died around 50,000 years ago. One of them was having a terrible time. An abscess was eating into his jawbone. He carried an intestinal parasite that causes acute diarrhea, and his plaque held traces of poplar, which contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. It also held penicillium, the mold behind penicillin, though Weyrich has said plainly that he was probably not seeking the mold out. It came in on rotting vegetation. The poplar is the part that matters. He was sick, and he was chewing the one thing in that forest that would blunt the pain. That is the pattern for the entire pre-farming world. Pain was an accident, an impacted tooth, a cracked molar, a jaw that got infected. Rare, individual, unlucky. Nobody's mouth was rotting on schedule. Then, about 10,000 years ago, humans started farming, and the human mouth fell apart. Compare hunter-gatherer teeth to the early farming populations that replaced them, and the shift is stark. Cavities, which had been uncommon, became ordinary. Gum disease climbed, and the jaw itself began to change. Soft, cooked, starchy food did not demand the heavy chewing that wild food did, and across these populations jaws grew smaller while the teeth stayed the same size. That is not the whole explanation for a crowded mouth. Genetics does plenty. But it is a large part of why crowding went from rare to routine, and it is a large part of why your wisdom teeth had nowhere to go. Farming fed vastly more people than hunting and gathering ever could, which is exactly why it won. It came with a bill, and part of that bill is in your mouth right now. Once farming wrecked our teeth, we started trying to fix them. The oldest tool is the chew stick, a twig, 5 or 6 inches long, one end chewed until the fibers frayed into a brush. Babylonians were using them by about 3500 BC. Egyptians were buried with them. People in the Middle East still use the same tool today, cut from a tree called Salvadora persica and sold as a miswak. Here is the part that should stop you. That particular wood carries natural antibacterial compounds that work on the bacteria behind decay. 5,500 years ago, out of every twig on the landscape, someone found the one that was already an antibacterial toothbrush. They had no idea why it worked. It just did. And then, for about 4,000 years, that was more or less it. Scrub the teeth with something rough. Pick out what the scrubbing missed. Nobody knew what caused decay, so nobody could aim at it. Dental care was mechanical, and it stayed mechanical until somebody wrote the recipe down. Long after the pharaohs were gone, in the 4th century AD, a scribe in Roman Egypt wrote out a formula in Greek for what he called a powder for white and perfect teeth. 1 part rock salt, 2 parts mint, 1 part dried iris flower, 20 grains of pepper. Crush it, mix it with saliva, rub it on. That papyrus sat in a rubbish dump, then in a Vienna library, unread, until a curator found it in 2003. A dentist mixed the recipe and tried it. He said it made his gums bleed. He also said his mouth felt clean afterward, and that it beat most of what was sold in the 19th century. 1,500 years before Colgate, somebody had already worked out that you clean teeth with salt and an abrasive, and you add mint so people will actually do it. Look at the whole timeline. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans and their relatives had strong teeth and almost no decay, and nobody was trying. The food did the scrubbing. The sugar was not there to do the damage. Then we invented farming, the single change that gave us cities and writing and everything you know. And in the process, we quietly broke our own mouths. Every tool that came after, the chew stick, the tooth powder, the bristle brush, the floss, the fluoride, the dentist, all of it is us climbing back toward a mouth we already had before we learned to grow our own food. So tonight, when you stand at the sink, understand what you are actually doing. This is not a skill your ancestors lacked. They had fewer cavities than you without any of it. You are dressing a wound that farming opened 10,000 years ago, and that sugar has been widening ever since. The toothbrush is not a triumph. It is an apology. Every study and every site behind this video is linked in the description.